Hello everyone, I'm Stacy Ramsauer and I'm really pleased to be a part of the Southwest Love Fest. It's been a wild year and just to be here sharing some information that I'm really passionate about with a wide audience of people I might not ever have come into contact with otherwise feels really nourishing at the end of a year that has been anything but. So if there's any resonance there for you, I'm so glad. And today we're going to talk about a subject that is equal parts ancient and totally contemporary. That subject being food, sleep, sex. And of course, they're three separate topics, but really what we're discussing today is the intersection of these three areas of our lived experience. Food, sleep, sex are described in the tradition of Ayurveda, which is an ancient healing system from India, as the three pillars of perfect health. Another point that I think really substantiates what we're going to talk about today is the definition of health in this system is to be established in oneself. So it's not a picture of a size or a capacity to run a certain amount or a particular diet. The definition of perfect health is to be fully established in oneself. And that includes not only our physical body, but our emotional expression, our mental health, and our spiritual capacity or connection. So that being said, I would love to initiate our time together with some dropping in to an awareness and hopefully experience of these layers of our being that contribute to our perfect health. And as a sort of disclaimer, I just want to say that, well, as I'm feeling this baby kick around inside me, I feel like it's a good disclaimer to let you know that I'm 39 weeks pregnant. So you'll notice a little bit of belching maybe and some squirming around. I'm less than totally comfortable today. That being said, I'm feeling very full of life, as you can imagine. And so bringing this baby's energy to the subject at hand feels really special. So this practice that I'll guide you through is maybe equal parts visualization and somatic experiencing. Not somatic experiencing as in the technique, although that's part of my background. The somatic portion of this process is really critical for our discussion today. To be in right relationship to what is on a physical level is arguably the challenge of our incarnation. And when I say right relationship, again, it's sort of the same thing as this perfect health concept. It's not a standard that someone else has set and decided upon. It is our own experience of to be established here in myself as whole and complete. So we'll go into all sorts of good stuff today, but let's start here with what I call a 4-level check-in. Those 4 levels are your physical body, your emotional body, mental body, and spiritual body. And it may be a new experience for you to consider those other levels as bodies. I really like imagery. And so the image of a nesting doll, for example, shows up a lot when I teach this practice. And whatever emerges for you, I encourage you to trust that. So you don't need to hold yourself firm to my images or my suggestions if they're not working for you. It is my hope that more than anything, it instigates your own creative response. But certainly the somatic layer, that visceral experience, is a big part of what we're leaning into today. So the noticing is really the stuff that we're after. What do you notice? And can we leave critique and judgment at the door and instead engage with curiosity and playfulness? So to start, the most important thing is that you feel established in your space, here and now. So please feel free as you scan your space with your eyes, your nose, your skin, your heart. What do you need to be even 10% more comfortable? Would you close that door, actually? Give yourself permission to do any little thing. Adjust the pillow under your seat or get a blanket. Maybe you would like to light some incense if that's something that is grounding for you. Remember, these are all just suggestions. And when you are ready, establish yourself in a comfortable posture that is as symmetrical as possible. The only reason for that is to help support some clarity of awareness. So we all have habits, particularly physical habits. And I'm not asking you to sit up with a rod straight spine if that's uncomfortable, unfamiliar, not pleasurable for you. But I am asking you, if you are going to lay down, to maybe lay with both arms straight and both legs straight, or both knees bent. If you are going to use some cushion, to not mimic how you would go to sleep, right? But to establish a posture that is in support of being alert and aware while relaxed. Okay. Take, excuse me, a once over of your space again. And then when it feels safe enough to do so, close your eyes, and at any point they can open, of course. Full permission to take care of yourself, not that you need it from me. Bring some awareness to the fact that you're breathing, and resist any temptation to start manipulating the breath. Your breath will respond to your attention. It's that simple dynamic of relationship to be witnessed. To be witnessed elicits a transformation. Notice your breath. And now notice your physical body. Let your attention scan the physical body the way your eyes might scan a physical landscape. Notice textures. Notice sensations. And as much as you can, scan without agenda. There's nothing you shouldn't find here. There's nothing you need to find. Notice if your attention lingers or continues to return to one spot or region. Notice that and include your entire physical landscape in this scan. And then without overthinking it, go ahead and give this layer of your experience a description, either a short phrase or a single word. You're welcome to say that out loud. Simple description. Try not to edit. And then take a cleansing breath, long and slow, in through your nostrils, out through your mouth, maybe with some sound, even a little movement. And we'll shift our focus to the emotional body. And I like to think of this layer as sort of the tone, if my body were an instrument. We're bringing attention to the feelings and emotions present and how we register that. It can be really tricky to not get stuck on analyzing this or that feeling. Meet the challenge. What is here today? And how is it showing up? Body, breath, impacting your ability to concentrate. You might be familiar with that wonderful Rumi poem, The Guest House. Just welcome it all. Give yourself a moment, a breath or two, to acknowledge your experience of this body. And then with no filter, describe it in a simple phrase or a single word. Feel free to say it out loud. And let's move on to the mental body, the realm of thoughts, words, images. A very dominant body in our culture. You can imagine the mental body like the sky that you observe in your day-to-day life. Notice the features of the sky without identifying as the sky. What is persistent here? Simply notice. Notice the images, a persistent word. maybe even an interplay between this body and another. Take a breath and let a description of this body emerge. The last layer is the spiritual body, and if that word doesn't resonate for you fully, there's something else that comes in. Go ahead and choose that. Being in this space of probably the most subtle and nuanced layer of your experience, I invite an opening, perhaps even imagining the crown of your head opening like a cup, a vessel. Notice what shows up, what drops in when you consider yourself as not finite. And maybe this layer, the description is actually more of a message or an attunement. Feel free to give voice to this. And then take some breaths, imagining or even sensing these four bodies coming together as a cohesive whole. Perhaps slipping into one another like you slip into perfectly cut clothes. Perhaps there's some unfamiliarity or even awkwardness as you layer them onto one another. Take a long, slow inhale, and when you feel full, sigh it out. You can make noise. And before you open your eyes, or if they're open, perhaps you close them gently just for this moment. Bring in, again, some playfulness and release the editor in your mind. Complete the following phrases. The first phrase is, I am. The second phrase is, I want. And the third phrase is, I need. And again, you're welcome to repeat these phrases out loud, silently to yourself, or even write them down. You're welcome to pause this if you want to journal for a few minutes, or just move your body around and not have someone talking at you. The gift of having this presentation be recorded is that you can really titrate. You can really take your time with this. And the challenge, of course, is that I'm not here live with you, and so I can't get your feedback and hear from you what that was like. But my sincere hope is that there was some little ray of light for you, and perhaps even a challenge. This awareness of where we are mostly established supports us fleshing out, literally, our experience of life in those areas where we are maybe a little bit malnourished or underactivated. And in this approach to full health, where we are resting on food, sleep, sex for our sense of well-being. Remember, we're feeding ourselves not just on the physical level, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. We're engaging rest and balance, which is the essence of sleep, not just mentally or physically, but emotionally and sexually, spiritually. And then, of course, with sex, it is a physical act, and there is an emotional component, there is a psychological component, and there is a spiritual component in my personal belief system and this approach that comes from Ayurveda. So again, let this information wash over you and take what feels useful, relevant, and maybe even sparks some curiosity, some newness for you. It doesn't all have to land as totally true, but it is my hope that having activated some of these layers within yourself that perhaps were more dormant before we started, there is a fuller sense of what's true and what's possible in terms of your well-being. So, let's give a little background to Ayurveda if that's not familiar to you. As I said, it's an ancient healing system from India, and I am not Indian. This is not my ethnic background. This is a field that I've studied extensively and utilized for my own healing. So I want to be very clear about that, the limits to my sharing. This is coming from my lived experience. And particularly these 3 pillars of health really resonated for me at a time in my life when I was emerging from a long period of darkness and self-destructive behavior that involved food and alcohol and sex. So this is sort of, it's certainly a distillation of information through my body, my mind, my spirit, and I encourage you to research, to study, and to seek out trustworthy guides in this field if you feel so inclined. Ayurveda, Ayur means life, and Veda means science. So it is the science of life or the study of life, and how beautiful that food, sleep, sex are these 3 pillars that all of the medicine rests upon. It is a practice of orienting the patient, the client, the person, and of course as a practitioner yourself, towards deep reverence for all that life has to offer, which is not always pleasant. And there is this foundational understanding, and this is what really turns me on about the science, that everything that exists in nature can bring illness or wellness. Everything that we can interact with, including kale, just to highlight some of our cultural biases, everything that we can engage with can either be our medicine or our poison. And the critical element here is relationship. How am I relating to this thing? Why am I bringing it into my life? In practice, how is this actually impacting me? And is that seasonal? Is that, just a matter of dosage? Or is there an element of self-harm and maybe like willful ignorance that's part of it? So in this system, the root of all disease, which, that's got a very specific connotation, but just imbalance, the root of all imbalance is what's called pragya pradha, which means a crime against wisdom, going against what we know in our heart of hearts, in this core sense of self. And remember, that definition of health is to be fully established in oneself, to be fully established in that visceral knowing that is so magical about the human body. Right? The way that the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, the way your gut churns when something is not quite right, the way that your heart opens and expands when you're in the presence of someone trustworthy. These messages are supported by our individual relationships with and behavior around food, sleep, sex. I'm going to keep saying these 3 words. You might get a little bit irritated about it. But let's take a couple of minutes. If you have something to write with, excellent. If you don't, maybe pause and go grab one. Go grab a pen, grab paper. And I just invite you into a couple minutes of inquiry, and I'll hold time here. What is your earliest memory of food? And again, try not to filter or, get too deep. Find just the perfect thing. Just what comes to you as your earliest memory of food. About a minute more from here. Try to keep writing. It can be just a series of short phrases. It doesn't have to be a perfectly composed paragraph. Who was there? How did it feel? What do you notice in your body as you recall this memory? Next point of inquiry, remember to stay established in the here and now as we go through these questions. So utilize your eyes, see where you actually are in time and space. Feel your body connected to gravity, particularly if any question is agitating. When it comes to food, and maybe even this particular memory that you recalled, were there consequences for your behavior that connected to food? Was food used as a punishment or a reward? A few more seconds. You can always pause the recording if you want more time. Take a breath from that one. And then last question in this sequence, how, if at all, did this impact your relationship to your body and nourishment? Your experience of nourishment, your understanding of nourishment. I'll just take about 30 more seconds for this one. I know it's pretty short. Again, you can pause. Okay. So take a moment to reestablish here and now. Use your eyes, scan your space. I've got a little gnat in my space. Maybe you want to shake a little bit, move your lips. Now, some of what I'm sharing is specific to Ayurveda in the sense that these are like foundational teachings. And a lot of what I'm sharing is a synthesis of my own experience and other teachings that I've taken in, which includes somatic experiencing, yoga, sex education, somatic sex educator, and intuition. So let all of your experience also be a useful filter for your understanding. Food, quite literally, establishes our here and now. So without a body, we're not here. And sure, we could parse that apart, but the human experience is based on incarnation and what we experience through the body. Doesn't mean that there aren't other layers of our experience coexisting with that physical one, but we are here in a physical plane enacting karma, for lack of a better word, and learning through this visceral experience, which includes pain, which includes hunger, which includes fatigue, which includes desire. Food is the building block for this physical body, and the physical body is essentially the, if we are vibrational beings, the quality of our vibration depends on the quality of the material that's vibrating. So that's flesh, that's blood, that's fat, that's bone, that's nerves, that's fluid, reproductive tissue. It's quite complex, many layered. And in Ayurveda, everything that we eat becomes a subtler and subtler layer of our physical experience. So all the way down to our reproductive fluid, which in this system is the same as our stamina and our immunity. That's what that fluid is equivalent to. The quality of that most subtle layer of our physical body determines how we're going to experience things like joy, like ecstasy, like anger. So food is this baseline to establish ourself in the here and now. And food is also this unbelievable vehicle for connection and relationship. Food is culture. Food is that first language. It is a way of knowing bitterness, sweetness, salty, right? We use all these words to describe emotional states as well. And before we're able to express that verbally or really consciously, we're learning these experiences through taste, through food. Just take a moment with that. And I so wish I were in a room with all of you and really getting to feel your bodies and see your faces and hear how this is landing. Maybe you want to take some notes on anything that you're connecting for yourself about food and taste and expression of an emotional state. This is a very rich subject. Food I'll probably spend the most time here actually, because as I've said, food really establishes sort of ground zero for how we're able to experience life and the world. And collectively, culturally, we have really fucked up our relationship to food. And I cannot speak for, other places around the world. I can confidently speak to American culture and this obsession that we have with being perfect about food, the myriad forms of diets that we've created out of nowhere. And nowhere will you find an American diet that's based on feeling established in your heart, feeling established in well-being. It is all about meeting some external standard that is primarily physical, appearance also, just making sure you're not too much this, you're not too that, and really vilifying appetite and hunger, which is equivalent to desire on so many levels. So let's take a moment to just breathe around that. Feel your butt on the floor, chair, couch, whatever you're sitting on. See your space. Maybe you have the pleasure of seeing some sunlight right now. And just, likely images and words are coming through, but notice how your physical body is responding to this conversation about food, diet, perfection. What shape does it give you? Are you noticing any kind of posturing or holding? And just be curious about that. Just see it, feel it, acknowledge it. I'm curious if you've had the experience yourself of perhaps feeling afraid of a certain quality or category of food. And then having an experience where that fear melts away. A feeling of being out of control with a certain food. Maybe it's just food in general, but in a certain scenario, a certain dynamic, that feeling of being out of control melts away. And what is that? What is that shift in dynamic that enables you to be, again, in right relationship and not this patriarchal right-wrong, but your internal yes, guiding you towards enough, towards satisfaction, toward balance. And that balance might even be like, I definitely felt too full after that second piece of chocolate cake at this amazing party or restaurant. And today it's just like, ooh, I'm going to drink extra water and balance it out, but it's not driven by guilt or shame. It's not like, okay, now I'm going to do the whole 30 because that was just too much sugar. And these are all thoughts and things that I've had and done. The constant cycle of punishment, the constant cycle of deny, overindulge, punish. I had a very profound experience when I was very much in an addiction pattern with alcohol. I celebrated my birthday with dear friends, and it was a very intimate party. And I had been in this just binge pattern with alcohol for a while. And so I was nervous, actually, but I also was anticipating this party and wanting to be with my friends in this particular way, which involved alcohol. And this is my story. my personal experience. And at the end of the evening, I was sort of shocked to not be wasted. And it was very clear that I was so present with my loved ones. I was so open to receiving their attention and their care that I didn't need to fill my spaces with anything else. And this awareness of sort of what I was really hungry for caused a huge change for me in my life. And maybe a month later, I got sober. And for fleshing out context, because I can't be here with you in person, my life now is based more on like harm reduction. I'm not sober in the strict sense, and I feel really established in myself and in my truth. And I think that a huge part of my learning and my transformation was supported by the wisdom of Ayurveda. Anything can be medicine or poison. It depends on how we're relating to it. And sometimes it takes this, it takes a cleanse. It takes a year of complete and total sobriety. It takes medical support. It takes energetic support. It takes what it takes to establish that kind of clarity within oneself, to know what is needed. And food creates that baseline sort of raw material for our flesh to be really responsive. This feels terrible to me. This feels scary. This feels safe. I get that on a visceral level, and I support that responsiveness and trustworthiness by how I take care of my flesh. And there are lots of ways to do that. This is where I really recommend you go deeper into the teachings of Ayurveda if you're turned on by this, because the wisdom is there and it's based on the qualities of nature. It's not based on somebody's sense of like body mass index and how many calories per pound of whatever and any sort of regimen, other than what qualities of nature are most predominant in you and how can you bring balance to yourself. So as a quick small example, because I think it's pretty fascinating, and this applies to our next two subjects as well. The qualities of fire can be purely creative, warm, illuminating, and nourishing. There can even be a softness to fire. Fire can also be the most destructive element. It can be sharp. It can be painful. It can be antagonizing. So fire is one of my primary qualities. And again, this is specific to Ayurveda and what we call constitution. So I've had to learn how to be with fire in a way that is really reverent and to create kind of a sacred fire pit around myself to keep this contained so that I can be as powerful as possible and not spread too thin and not sort of ravenous and out of control, which has been a theme for much of my life. So I'll give you a moment's pause. Maybe you want to take a longer pause. I want to make sure we get to these other two subjects and honor them fully. The topic of sleep I find really fascinating because it does mean actual sleep, like the act of sleeping. But what sleep helps establish is a balance in nervous system function. So we're talking about self-regulation. We're talking about the body's capacity to regenerate and heal itself on a daily basis. And we're talking about being in balance with nature. Now, sleep looks different for everybody, much like food, much like sex. It's a personal thing, and there are some general ground rules for sleep. You need sleep, period. Not being able to sleep is an indication of imbalance, because sleep is a, pardon the use of the word, normal part of our physical, mental body function. Sleep is required for strong digestion. Sleep is required for building muscle. Sleep is required for emotional regulation. Sleep is required for growth, physical and otherwise. Sleep is required for immune function. So there are lots of factors that contribute to our relationship to sleep. And I'll get into a little more of the nitty-gritty of Ayurveda in terms of these qualities of nature. There are 5 elements in this system that are referred to and drawn from in understanding health and medicine: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Each of those 5 elements has their own qualities that help a practitioner, a curious student, a client sort of find their own medicine. In this system, this is interesting, an adage of the system is opposites cure each other. Like increases like. So the quality of fire, one of those qualities is it's hot, it's unstable. If I add fuel, which is also hot, unstable, to fire, I'm going to get more volatility, more instability. If I add earth to fire, which is heavier, which is stable, it's a steadier fuel source. So it's not don't add fuel to fire, it's the quality of the fuel that we're adding. The mind, which I think has been fairly well established as really like what we're resting when we sleep. The mind in Ayurveda is ruled by the air and ether elements, which are weightless. They're mobile. Another word that's used to describe both is rough, dry. So there's just a lot of quick change in the mind. Earth is arguably the most opposite, water too. They're both weighted elements. And if this is helpful, one way of sort of thinking about or getting better at understanding the qualities of each element is imagine you have a bucket full of it. So a bucket of air, it's like there's nothing there, right? It's a little bit detached. A bucket of earth, that's heavy. That's something you have to hold, concentrate on moving. Bucket of water, same thing. It's heavy. There's density to it. Water obviously has more mobility than earth, but it needs some momentum for that. So without getting lost there, let's come back to sleep. One of the, I think most familiar, most often given reasons for not being able to sleep and also not being able to meditate is an overactive mind. Well, just giving into that movement and getting up and keeping busy is not necessarily going to help, but it can also feel like trying to stop a moving train, to just like force yourself to be still. which can be more agitating. So the mind, ruled by air and ether, which are elements that want to move, the mind is the center of creativity. Give a rhythm to that. It's sort of funny to think about. Here's where we get those somewhat stupid practices of like counting sheep. There's movement, but there's a rhythm, and that starts to create stability. In some meditation techniques, it's as simple as repeating a mantra over and over again. A sound as you breathe in, a sound as you breathe out, or even saying, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. Establishing a rhythm, establishing stability through rhythm is how you can bring in this opposite flavor, more earth, more water, fluidity, weight, and also the rhythm that we maintain in our day. So air and ether elements in their natural state are quite erratic and irregular. There's no sort of constancy to them. Earth is pretty constant. So the primary medicine given in Ayurveda is what's called daily rhythm, dinacharya. Getting up at the same time every day, having lunch at the same time every day, having roughly the same bedtime. And this changes through the seasons, right? As days get longer, shorter. If there's more fire in the environment, in Tucson summer, that's certainly true. Then we make small adjustments. But for the most part, rhythm is the medicine. It's the first medicine given. It's the first prescription. And this is a way of establishing earth and water to counterbalance the effect of most imbalance. Sort of the most common instigator of imbalance is the air element, because it is erratic, because it is disturbed. So I offer this to you to consider how much rhythm is there in your day, and what does that rhythm support? So you might have a very well-established rhythm, but that rhythm is actually supporting a bit more chaos in your mind. And it could be as simple as, sleeping in, getting more kind of like earth and heaviness at the top of your day, and having this sort of frantic buildup into your evening, and then the mind can't stop. And I'm certainly speaking from a perspective of kind of what's offered as like typical in the system of Ayurveda. And if you're a night owl, and if all your creativity comes out at night and this works, then leave what I'm offering right now. This is really just like, if you're not sick, don't take medicine, right? So if there's not an imbalance, then there's no need to apply this prescription. But if there's resonance here about, quality of sleep, a typical pattern for disturbance in the air element is waking up at about 2 a.m., 1, 2, 3 a.m. consistently and being wide awake. That's typical for mental imbalance. And I don't mean mental health imbalance. I just mean mental activity. And so having some more rhythm around bedtime, establishing a routine for your sleep that moves you, right? That helps you feel more established in yourself. So I could give you a full prescription, right? Based on, the rightness of how to be in your body, in your day. But something that even though this system of medicine has very, very strong patriarchal roots, there's also a deep feminine wisdom behind it, which can be found in some of the most ancient texts educating about Ayurveda. One of the teachings is this medicine must be applied to the individual and their unique environment and adapted to the times in which they live. So I'll give a sweet story, and then we can move on to everybody's favorite topic, sex. I have a teacher named Prashanti, and he's a mad scientist in every sense of the word. And he was working as an Ayurvedic practitioner in the Bay Area, and one of his clients was having some health issues, showing up in emotional volatility and difficulty with digestion, losing weight that they didn't want to lose. I think that's hopefully established. And this person was also like, their life was based on party culture and club culture. So he asked them, when does the party get really good? Like, when do you need to be there? They were like 3 to 6 a.m. So he offered them this prescription: sleep from 10 to 2. Get up and go to the party. And when you're out, wear heavy shoes, wear steel-toed boots, wear a leather jacket, get weight on your body to help establish ground. You know, it wasn't about like, well, you're doing all this wrong, and so that's why this, and this are happening. It's like, no, we can just change the relationship a little bit, bring some awareness to some key points, and help to bring about more balance. Sleep is a balancing action. So is eating, but in particular, sleep is about bringing balance to all the activity that is a part of being alive, that is a part of our natural expression. We're up, we're down, and in order to sustain our sense of lust for life, we have to have that balance of drawing in. And here's where we sort of naturally move into sex and sexuality. If you're not already familiar with him, Stanley Kellerman was a really fantastic somatic educator. And he wrote a book called The Human Ground about sexuality and belonging. And he describes sex and sexuality as equivalent to life force. And it's this pulsation. And this is, quintessential yoga, tantra, Ayurvedic teaching. To be alive is to be in pulsation. And to be alive is to breathe, which just takes less than 10 seconds of observation. You recognize that pulsation. To be alive is to be in constant relationship with opening and closing and moving toward and drawing away from, and establishing balance. Our body is doing it automatically, all the time. Sometimes we need a very big, deep breath. Sometimes we need a very long exhale. Sometimes our breath is quite shallow. Sometimes we have to sweat profusely. Sometimes we retain our heat and our fluids. Sometimes we are very eager to be out and socializing, and other times we are not willing. This is the body's natural response to life, to the ever-present ebbing and flowing of the seasons, our environment, our climate, our relationships, our understanding of the world. And again, we can't control much of it. And it's not about control. It's not about dominance over. It's really about being in partnership. So how do I support my innate capacity to adapt to be in flux in a healthy way with the things that I have to do anyway. I have to eat. I have to sleep. And, no one has to have sex, but this is the continuation of life force to be in pleasure. And whether that means the actual physical act of sex or not is kind of irrelevant here. But I would like to bring in some awareness of sex and sexuality as being inclusive of pure enjoyment of having a body, having a mind, having a spirit that makes us available to forces beyond our senses. So when it comes to sex, Ayurveda really considers sex and sexuality something very sacred. And part of that is, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the reproductive fluids of the body are considered to be, are taught to be, and are the most subtle refinement of everything we consume and take in. So going back to food, everything we take in physically becomes our physical body. And healthy digestion is measured as the body's capacity to assimilate what is useful and make something of it. Healthy skin, healthy hair, good muscle tone, not too much fat, but fat is healthy, good circulation in the joints, and to eliminate regularly and not too much what is not needed. So one of the first things you're going to be asked by an Ayurvedic practitioner, Chinese medicine too, how's your elimination? What do your bowel movements feel like? What do they look like? What do they smell like? Not the most pleasant conversation here, but I wanted to name that. We're going back to the beginning. What we take in and how it's being processed and utilized by the body makes itself known at much, much subtler levels, which includes sexual desire and, again, sorry to use the word, performance, right? Our body's capacity to lubricate, our body's capacity to, even the pulsation that is orgasm, for our muscle tissue to respond easily and intelligently. That doesn't mean that we always have this experience, but to be able to differentiate between a physical challenge and an emotional challenge when it comes to sex is partially based on how we're feeding ourselves. So when it comes to the act of sex, sexual desire, this is thought to be a pure urge and natural urge. And I think the only reason, upon reflection, why I'm saying it that way is, again, because there's so much sort of fighting against this that we've collectively had to do. It has not always been this way. If you're familiar with an educator named Rianne Eisler, she's most famous for a book called The Chalice and the Blade. She has another wonderful book called Sacred Pleasure. And it's about this shift from partnership culture, goddess worshiping agrarian cultures in our really not so distant past, to what she calls dominance culture, which we're now, mostly calling patriarchy, white supremacy. In partnership culture, the essence of it all, of life, is relationship. And of course, that's what we've been talking about this whole time. Our relationship to all of it determines the quality of the outcome. So our relationship to sex and sexuality is not only influenced by sort of outside forces, right? Of course, culture and religion and family and social groups have an impact on our experience of sex and sexuality, for better and for worse. But our capacity to be established in self and to sense, is this good for me? Is this a yes right now? What are my boundaries? What are my limits? What do I need now that I'm already here in order to make this a nourishing, useful, life-affirming experience? And not that everything has to be useful and life-affirming, but I think we can all agree we'd rather we were having more of those experiences. And so the quality of our experiences, we really set in motion several steps ahead of time. The quality of relationship to felt experience, inner knowing that includes all 4 levels of our being, our willingness to be in balance, to be open and to be closed sometimes, our willingness to be here alone, established in self and with those experiences that have been less than nourishing. When we emerge into sexual dynamics and sexual partnerships, the more we have assimilated all of this previous work, the pain, the emotional investigation, the clear and honest acknowledgement of where we may have harmed ourselves or maybe overridden our actual needs, can only serve to flesh out our experiences in a way that is going to bring more depth and more enjoyment overall. I think more contemporary teachings on Tantra are definitely connected to these ancient teachings of Ayurveda, which reveres the sexual fluid and reproductive fluid as being a critical part of one's physical health and creativity, creative capacity, not to mention the relationship to higher spiritual realms. And maybe you don't need me to demystify that. You're not interested in the demystification, but I think there's some real pleasure in landing it on the ground a little bit. This, again, establishment of self is depicted, and I've felt it on a physical level myself, as a central channel. If you are familiar with the caduceus, it's the symbol in the American Medical Association, it's the staff of Hermes, it's a fairly ubiquitous symbol. In Ayurveda, Tantra, Yoga, it is this central channel with sort of, weaving serpents, but the weaving channels of the breath in and out, up and down, sort of traversing this central channel. And it's a way of depicting the fact that self is here, center is here, and there is a quality of polarity. I'm very much here in a physical body. I also have access to what is beyond this physical sphere. I'm able to imagine beyond my own body, beyond my own lived experience. I've had moments of being able to tune into things that feel beyond this earthly realm. And what connects me, what sort of enables the power of that is this pulsation. It's opening and it's closing. I'm not trying to launch myself out into outer space and leave this body behind in this physical experience. I'm also not getting so fixated on what is just here, just tangible, just visible, that, I sort of lose the bigger picture or even pleasure and mystery. So you might consider this sort of progression through food, sleep, sex. When we arrive at sexuality, there's very much reverence for the engagement of sex and sexuality in relationship as one chooses to be in relationship with another. And also, there's room for some containment of it, or like harnessing of that power as both a physical tonic, literally, like containing some of that immense energy and channeling it in sharing, in creating a baby, in building a business, in growing a garden, in experiencing our aliveness and our pleasure with life in a multitude of ways, and also some spiritual awareness. So, of course, there are a lot of sexual practices designed to enhance spiritual connection. Critically for all of this, of course, is that it's authentic to you and that you are well established in your own sense of open and contained, yes and no, and that dynamic is really clear with whomever you're in partnership with. So I really long for the opportunity to see your faces, to read your comments, to hear voices would of course be best, and I'm hopeful that soon enough we will be able to gather all together, and perhaps a reprisal or continuation of this subject will happen at next year's Southwest Love Fest. But for now, I'd love to conclude our talk with just another opportunity to drop in, to establish ground and center with each of you. And if it feels safe enough to close your eyes, you're invited to do so. Notice if there's any part of you, physical or otherwise, that wants some holding, that would feel supported by touch. And you're welcome to place one or both hands there. Take a few breaths, finding your own rhythm here of just very slightly rocking your weight forward and then back with the rhythm of your breath. Noticing where movement, sensation feels really accessible, really easy for you, and where you might become aware of, if not a numb spot, just like something a little less available, less familiar, and get curious about it. You don't have to overindulge in the less familiar, but establish some balance. And find something that feels like center for you now. It might not be perfect center. It might not be totally still. with a long, slow breath. You may close your eyes. You may bring hands to heart center if that gesture is meaningful to you. I've been taught this as a gesture of respect and recognition. I extend my deep gratitude to each of you, wherever you are. Humility at the opportunity to share this information, wisdom that I've been blessed by. And I look forward to our next opportunity to be together, to learn from one another. In honor of each of you, in honor of your path, thank you so much.